everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like and one share. Thank you so much.
Everything fell apart. Have you ever stared at a single email and felt as if your entire future had just disappeared? What if the worst day of your life was actually the beginning of something you never knew you needed? Before you decide to give up on your goals, your English, your dreams, or even yourself, stay with me. My story begins on an ordinary morning in California, but it ends somewhere completely unexpected. I lost my job, my confidence, and almost my sense of direction. Yet what I found afterward changed my life in ways that no promotion, paycheck, or career title ever could. As you listen to this slow and easy English story, you may discover that sometimes the door that closes is the very thing that helps you find the right path. One Tuesday morning, I woke up at 6 o'clock, just like I had done for years. The California sun was beginning to rise. The sky outside my window was painted with soft shades of orange and pink. Everything seemed normal. My husband was preparing coffee in the kitchen. My children were still asleep upstairs. The day looked exactly like hundreds of other days before it. Nothing felt unusual. I checked my phone while sitting at the edge of my bed. There was a new email from my company. At first, I did not think much about it. Companies send emails all the time. Updates. Meetings. Announcements. Training schedules. The usual things. I opened the message. Within seconds, my heart dropped. The words were polite. The tone was professional. The email was short. My position had been eliminated. I read the message once. Then twice. Then a third time. It felt impossible. I had worked hard for years. I arrived early. I stayed late. I volunteered for extra projects. I helped new employees learn their jobs. I believed loyalty mattered. Yet there I was, sitting on my bed in silence, suddenly unemployed. For a few moments, I could not move. The strange thing about bad news is that the world keeps moving even when your own world stops. Outside, birds continued singing. Cars continued driving down the street. My coffee maker started making its familiar sound. Somewhere, a neighbor was walking a dog. Everything looked normal. Nothing felt normal. Psychologists often explain that sudden job loss can trigger a stress response similar to other major life disruptions. The brain interprets uncertainty as a threat. When people lose stability, the mind immediately begins searching for answers. How will I pay bills? What happens next? What if I cannot find another job? That morning, my brain seemed determined to ask every frightening question possible. I walked slowly into the kitchen. My husband looked at me and immediately knew something was wrong. What happened? He asked. I tried to answer. No words came out. Instead, I handed him my phone. He read the email. Then he looked back at me. For several seconds, neither of us said anything. Silence can sometimes feel louder than words. I sat at the kitchen table while my coffee grew cold. My children eventually came downstairs, laughing about something they had seen online. They were smiling. They were happy. They had no idea that one email had completely changed the atmosphere of the house. I forced a smile. Parents do that sometimes. We smile while carrying invisible storms. After breakfast, I drove alone through the streets of our neighborhood. I did not have a destination. I simply drove. California is often shown as a place of opportunity. beautiful beaches, palm trees, successful careers, new beginnings. But that morning, even the sunshine felt different. I stopped at a traffic light and looked around. People were heading to work. Some were listening to music. Some were talking on the phone. Some were probably worried about their own problems. And then a strange thought entered my mind. How many of these people are pretending everything is fine? How many are carrying fears that nobody else can see? The thought stayed with me. For years, I believed successful people had everything figured out. Now I was beginning to suspect that many people were simply learning how to keep moving forward despite uncertainty. I parked near a small public park and sat on a bench. The air was cool. Children were playing nearby. An elderly couple walked slowly along a path, holding hands. A young mother pushed a stroller. Life continued. As I watched people pass by, another realization appeared. My job had become my identity. Not just my income. Not just my schedule. My identity. When someone asked, "What do you do?" I always had an answer. Now I felt as if part of me had disappeared. Many experts describe this as an identity crisis. When work becomes deeply connected to self-worth, losing a job can feel like losing part of yourself. The challenge is not only financial. It becomes emotional and psychological. At that moment, I did not know any of those terms. I only knew that I felt lost. Completely lost. The funny thing is that life sometimes hides its biggest lessons inside uncomfortable moments. At the time, I could not see that. I only saw uncertainty. I only saw fear. I only saw questions. But if someone had shown me a picture of my future on that day, I would never have believed it. Because the job I lost was not the thing that would define the next chapter of my life. Something else was waiting. Something far more valuable. Something connected to family, love, purpose, and even the simple act of slowing down and truly listening. That discovery was still hidden beyond the horizon. For now, all I had was a quiet park bench, a heavy heart, and a future that suddenly looked completely blank. And strangely enough, that blank space was where the real story was about to begin. The silent drive home. There is a strange moment that happens after bad news arrives. The shock begins to fade, but clarity has not arrived yet. You are trapped somewhere in the middle. Your body keeps moving, but your mind feels frozen. That was exactly where I found myself after losing my job in California. Looking back now, I can honestly say that the drive home changed more than my afternoon. It changed the direction of my life. The surprising part is that nothing dramatic happened on that drive. There were no accidents, no sudden miracles, and no life-changing phone calls. What happened was much quieter. And sometimes the quiet moments become the most important chapters of our story. I sat inside my car for a few minutes before starting the engine. The parking lot around me seemed ordinary. People walked past carrying shopping bags. Someone pushed a stroller. A man in a business suit hurried toward a nearby office building. Life was moving forward for everyone else. At least that was how it appeared. My hands rested on the steering wheel, but I felt disconnected from everything around me. I kept replaying the email in my mind. The words had become trapped in a loop. Position eliminated. Workforce reduction. We appreciate your contributions. Thank you for your service. The sentences sounded professional. They also sounded cold. I finally started the engine and slowly pulled onto the road. The California sunshine filled the windshield. Palm trees lined the streets. The weather was beautiful. Ironically, beautiful weather can feel almost offensive when your life feels messy. Have you ever noticed that? The world seems unwilling to match your mood. Somewhere deep inside, I wanted the sky to be gray. I wanted rain. I wanted something dramatic that reflected how I felt. Instead, California looked like a travel advertisement. The contrast made me laugh quietly to myself. It was the first laugh I had managed all day. Not because anything was funny. Because life sometimes feels absurd. As I drove through familiar streets, I noticed something strange. Every billboard seemed to be talking about success. Every advertisement promised a better future. Every office building looked full of people who probably still had jobs. My mind began creating stories. That is what anxious brains do. They create stories. Maybe everyone else is doing better than me. Maybe everyone else has life figured out. Maybe I am falling behind. Psychologists call this comparison bias. We compare our behind-the-scenes struggles to everyone else's highlight reel. Social media has made this even worse. We see promotions, vacations, new houses, smiling families, and perfect moments. We rarely see the sleepless nights, the worries, the failures, and the fears hiding behind those images. As I stopped at another red light, I looked around carefully. For the first time, I began wondering what hidden stories existed inside the cars around me. The young man driving a truck might have been struggling financially. The woman talking on her phone might have received difficult medical news. The older gentleman in the SUV might have been worried about retirement. Suddenly, I realized I was probably not alone. My struggle felt unique because I was living it. But uncertainty is one of the most universal human experiences. Nobody escapes it forever. The light turned green. I continued driving. My route home usually took about 25 minutes. That day it felt much longer. My thoughts kept returning to my family. More specifically, I worried about what losing my job would mean for them. My husband had always been supportive. My children had always made me smile. But now I imagined uncomfortable conversations. I imagined explaining budget changes. I imagined saying no to activities and purchases. I imagined disappointing people I loved. Fear has a way of making the future look darker than it really is. Researchers have found that people often overestimate how bad future problems will feel and underestimate their ability to adapt. At the time, however, I was not thinking about research. I was simply worried. The neighborhood where we lived appeared ahead in the distance. Normally that sight brought comfort. Today it brought pressure. Home represented responsibility. Home meant facing reality. Home meant answering questions I did not yet know how to answer. I slowed down as I entered the neighborhood. Children were riding bicycles on the sidewalk. A couple walked hand in hand near the community park. Someone was mowing a lawn. The smell of freshly cut grass drifted through the air. Everything looked peaceful. Yet something inside me had changed. Suddenly, I noticed details I usually ignored. The flowers in front of a neighbor's house. The sound of birds in nearby trees. The sunlight reflecting off windows. It was as if losing my job had forced me to stop rushing for the first time in years. Before that day, my life had become a race. Wake up. Work. Meetings. Deadlines. Grocery shopping. Laundry. Dinner. Sleep. Repeat. Like millions of people across America, I was constantly busy. And because I was busy, I assumed I was productive. Because I was productive, I assumed I was successful. But sitting in my car that afternoon, I started asking a dangerous question. What if being busy and being successful are not the same thing? The question stayed with me. I parked in my driveway but did not get out. The engine was off. The house stood quietly in front of me. I looked at the front door and felt nervous. That surprised me. Why would I be nervous about entering my own home? Then I understood. Inside that house were the people whose opinions mattered most to me. Inside that house was the life I was afraid of failing. I remained there for several minutes. Then my phone vibrated. A simple notification appeared on the screen. It was a message from my daughter that she had sent earlier that morning before school. I had been too busy to notice it. The message contained only 5 words. Love you, Mom. Have fun. That was all. 5 simple words. Yet those 5 words hit harder than the email that had ended my career. My eyes filled with tears. Because at that moment I remembered something I had forgotten. My family did not love me because of my job title. They did not love me because of my salary. They did not love me because of my professional achievements. They loved me because I was their wife, their mother, and their family. For the first time all day, the fear loosened its grip. Not completely. The uncertainty remained. The financial questions remained. The future remained unclear. But another feeling appeared beside the fear. Hope. Small, quiet, and fragile hope. I opened the car door and stepped outside. I took a deep breath. Then I walked toward the house, unaware that a conversation waiting inside would completely change how I viewed failure, success, marriage, family. And the unexpected opportunity hidden inside one of the worst days of my life. The next chapter was about to begin, and it would start with a sentence from my husband that I never expected to hear. My husband's unexpected words. Some conversations last only a few minutes but quietly change the direction of an entire life. Have you ever experienced that? A single sentence. A simple observation. A few ordinary words spoken at exactly the right moment. Before I walked through my front door that afternoon, I expected many things. I expected concern. I expected questions. I expected difficult discussions about money and the future. What I did not expect was that my husband would say something so surprising that it would completely challenge the story I had been telling myself all day. At that point, I believed I had lost something important. I had no idea that I was about to gain a completely different perspective. I slowly opened the front door and stepped inside. The familiar smell of home greeted me immediately. Dinner preparations had already begun. I could hear movement in the kitchen. For a brief moment, I stood there quietly, almost as if I needed permission to enter my own life again. My husband looked up from the counter and smiled gently. Not a forced smile. Not a nervous smile. A calm smile. Somehow that made me emotional all over again. The children were busy in another room. The house felt peaceful. Too peaceful. My emotions felt completely out of place inside such an ordinary afternoon. How are you feeling? He asked. It sounded like a simple question. Yet I struggled to answer it. How do you summarize fear, disappointment, uncertainty, and exhaustion in one sentence? I placed my purse on a chair and sat down at the kitchen table. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then the words finally came. I feel like I failed. The moment I said it aloud, the sentence felt heavier than it had inside my head. Failed. Such a powerful word. Such a dangerous word. Human beings often connect events with identity. We do not say, I experienced failure. We say, I am a failure. The difference may seem small, but psychologically it is enormous. One describes an event. The other describes a person. I did not realize it then, but I had already turned losing my job into a judgment about my entire worth. My husband pulled out a chair and sat across from me. Then he said something unexpected. You lost a job, he said softly. You didn't lose yourself. I stared at him. The sentence sounded simple. Almost too simple. Yet it stopped my thoughts completely. All day long, I had been treating my career and my identity as the same thing. Somewhere along the way, I had allowed my job title to become proof of my value. Without it, I felt smaller. Less important. Less successful. My husband seemed to see exactly what was happening. Can I ask you something? He said. I nodded. If one of our children loses a game at school, do you think they're a loser? Of course not, I replied immediately. If a friend loses a job, do you think they're worthless? No. If someone experiences one setback, does that erase all their good qualities? No. I already knew where this conversation was heading. Then why are you treating yourself differently? He asked. The question landed harder than I expected. Because the truth was uncomfortable. We often show more kindness to strangers than we show ourselves. We forgive other people for mistakes. We understand their struggles. We recognize their humanity. Yet when we fail, we become our own harshest critics. Research in psychology consistently shows that self-compassion improves resilience during difficult times. People who speak to themselves with understanding often recover from setbacks faster than those who rely only on self-criticism. Yet many of us continue believing that being hard on ourselves somehow creates success. My husband understood something important. Criticism was not what I needed that day. Perspective was. He stood up and walked to the living room window. Outside, the afternoon sunlight stretched across our backyard. Do you know what I think? He asked. I think you've been running for years. I laughed quietly. Running? Yes, he said. Running from one responsibility to the next. Running from meeting to meeting. Running from deadline to deadline. You've been so busy taking care of everyone else that you haven't had time to take care of yourself. I wanted to argue. I wanted to explain how necessary everything had been. The career. The schedule. The constant activity. But deep down, I knew he was right. Life had become a series of tasks. Every day felt full, yet somehow rushed. Every week disappeared faster than the one before it. I had been surviving efficiently but not necessarily living intentionally. My husband returned to the table and sat down again. Then he said something even more surprising. Maybe this isn't happening to you, he said. Maybe it's happening for you. I almost laughed. It sounded impossible. How could losing a job possibly be helping me? At that moment, I could see only problems. Bills. Responsibilities. Uncertainty. Yet his words planted a small seed in my mind. A question began forming. What if this situation contained something I could not see yet? Human beings are naturally terrible at predicting how life events will affect long-term happiness. Studies have shown that people often overestimate the negative impact of setbacks and underestimate their ability to adapt. Many individuals later identified difficult experiences as major turning points that ultimately improved their lives. Of course, those lessons usually become clear only in hindsight. While living through hardship, meaning often remains hidden. My husband seemed to understand that. You don't have to figure everything out tonight, he said. You only need to figure out the next step. That advice felt surprisingly comforting. When people face uncertainty, they often try solving the entire future at once. The result is overwhelm. But focusing on one next step creates momentum. One step. Then another. Then another. The future becomes manageable. The conversation continued through dinner. The children eventually joined us. They talked about school, friends, and funny stories from their day. Watching them laugh, I noticed something unexpected. The world had not ended. My family was still here. Love was still here. The foundation of my life remained intact. Yes, challenges were ahead. Yes, uncertainty remained. But for the first time since opening that email, I felt something stronger than fear. Curiosity. What if my husband was right? What if this chapter was not an ending? What if it was the beginning of something I could not yet imagine? That night, as I prepared for bed, those questions stayed with me. I did not have answers. Not yet. But somewhere between losing my job and ending that conversation, a subtle shift had occurred. I stopped asking, why did this happen? And started asking, what can I learn from this? And that small change in perspective would soon lead me toward discoveries about life, family, purpose, and happiness that I had completely overlooked for years. Learning to slow down. Imagine spending years running as fast as possible, only to discover that nobody was chasing you. Strange thought, isn't it? Yet that realization arrived unexpectedly during the weeks after I lost my job. At first, unemployment felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Every morning I woke up with questions about money, the future, and my career. But something unusual began happening once the initial shock faded. For the first time in many years, my schedule was no longer controlling every hour of my day. There were no early meetings. No urgent emails. No endless deadlines waiting for me before sunrise. The silence felt uncomfortable at first. Then it became fascinating. What I discovered during that period surprised me more than losing the job itself. I began noticing a version of life that had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. And strangely enough, it started with something as simple as a morning walk. A few days after my conversation with my husband, I decided to leave the house early and walk through the neighborhood. Normally, I would have been rushing to work. Instead, I stepped outside with nowhere important to be. The California morning air felt cool and refreshing. Birds moved between trees. Sprinklers quietly watered lawns. The world seemed calmer than I remembered. Or perhaps the world had always been calm. Perhaps I had simply been too busy to notice. As I walked, I realized something surprising. I could not remember the last time I had taken a walk without checking my phone every few minutes. That thought made me laugh. Modern life has trained many of us to believe that every second must be productive. We listen to podcasts while exercising, answer emails while eating lunch, scroll through social media while watching television. Even our relaxation often becomes another task on the schedule. Researchers studying attention have found that constant stimulation can leave people feeling mentally exhausted. The brain rarely receives opportunities to rest and process information. In many ways, we have become experts at staying busy and beginners at being present. That morning, I tried something unusual. I simply walked. No headphones. No phone. No distractions. At first, it felt almost uncomfortable. Then something remarkable happened. I started noticing details. The scent of flowers growing near a fence. The sound of wind moving through palm trees. The laughter of children heading to school. The smile of an elderly woman watering her garden. Tiny moments. Ordinary moments. Beautiful moments. Moments I would have completely missed just a few weeks earlier. One morning became 2. Then 3. Then an entire week. The walks slowly became part of my routine. During those walks, I began observing everyday life in America from a different perspective. For years, I had experienced my community through the lens of work. Now I was seeing it through the lens of curiosity. I noticed how neighbors greeted each other. I noticed local business owners opening their shops each morning. I noticed parents walking children to school. I noticed retired couples enjoying slow breakfasts at outdoor cafes. Life was happening everywhere. Not just inside office buildings. That realization sounds obvious now, but at the time it felt profound. For years, I had unconsciously linked success with career achievement. Yet many of the happiest people I observed seemed focused on something different. Relationships. Community. Family. Health. Meaning. One afternoon, I sat on a bench in a small local park and watched people pass by. A young father played catch with his son. A woman walked her dog while talking with a friend. 2 older men sat nearby discussing baseball with incredible enthusiasm. Nobody appeared to be rushing. Nobody appeared obsessed with productivity. They were simply living. And suddenly a question entered my mind. When had I stopped doing that? When had I become so focused on reaching the next milestone that I forgot to enjoy the present moment? Psychologists often describe a phenomenon called the arrival fallacy. It is the belief that happiness will finally arrive once we achieve the next goal. The promotion. The salary increase. The larger house. The perfect opportunity. The problem is that after reaching one goal, another immediately appears. The finish line keeps moving. Many people spend decades chasing a future version of happiness while ignoring the happiness available today. I began wondering if I had fallen into that trap. The answer was uncomfortable. I probably had. That realization changed how I approached each day. Instead of obsessing over finding a new job immediately, I decided to create small daily routines that supported my well-being. Every morning I walked. Every afternoon I spent time reading. Every evening I sat with my family during dinner without constantly thinking about work. These were not dramatic changes. They were simple. Yet simple actions often create powerful results. Scientific studies consistently show that routines involving movement, social connection, gratitude, and mindfulness can significantly improve emotional resilience. In other words, small habits can help people recover from difficult experiences faster than they expect. Without realizing it, I was slowly rebuilding myself. Not my career. Myself. One day, while sitting outside a coffee shop, I noticed something else. My stress levels were lower. The future was still uncertain. I still needed another job. Financial responsibilities had not disappeared. Yet my mind no longer felt trapped in panic. The fear that had dominated my thoughts during the first week was gradually losing its power. Curiosity was taking its place. Curiosity about life. Curiosity about people. Curiosity about what might come next. My husband noticed the difference too. "You seem lighter," he said one evening. At first, I dismissed the comment. Then I realized he was right. I felt different. Not because my problems were solved. Because my perspective was changing. I had spent years believing that slowing down would make me fall behind. Instead, slowing down was helping me see clearly. There is a funny irony hidden inside modern life. People often move faster and faster because they want more control. Yet sometimes slowing down provides the clarity needed to make better decisions. That lesson would soon become incredibly important. Because only a few days later, during one of my regular visits to a neighborhood coffee shop, I would meet someone completely unexpected. A stranger. A simple conversation. Nothing extraordinary at first glance. Yet that encounter would introduce me to a friendship that would eventually open doors I never imagined possible. At the time, however, I knew none of that. I only knew that life felt different. For the first time in years, I was paying attention. And when you finally start paying attention, the world has a fascinating way of revealing opportunities that were there all along. A different kind of education. What if one of the most valuable lessons of your life did not come from a classroom, a university, or a training course? What if it arrived during one of the most uncertain periods you had ever experienced? That question became surprisingly important during the weeks after I lost my job. At first, I believed my time away from work would be temporary. I would update my resume, submit applications, attend interviews, and eventually return to normal life. That seemed like the logical plan. Yet something unexpected happened along the way. The more I slowed down, the more I realized that I had spent years learning how to work but very little time learning how to truly live. And oddly enough, one of the most important tools in that discovery was language itself. Not complicated business language. Not professional vocabulary. Simple everyday English. The kind of English people use when they talk about family, dreams, disappointments, friendships, and life. Looking back, I sometimes think losing my job forced me into a completely different kind of education. One that changed me far more than any career seminar ever could. Every morning after my walk, I developed a new routine. I would make a cup of coffee, sit near the kitchen window, and spend time reading simple stories, articles, and conversations in English. At first, I started doing it merely to keep my mind active. I wanted to maintain good habits while searching for a new job. But over time, it became something much more meaningful. For years, most of my reading had focused on productivity, business, leadership, and professional growth. There is nothing wrong with those subjects. They can be valuable. Yet I noticed something interesting. Very few of those books taught me how to handle disappointment. Very few taught me how to slow down. Very few taught me how to appreciate ordinary moments. The stories I began reading during that period felt different. Some were about families. Some were about friendships. Some were about people overcoming challenges. Some were simply about everyday life. The language was simple. The lessons were powerful. One morning I read a short story about an elderly man who spent years chasing financial success before realizing that his happiest memories involved time spent with family. The story itself was uncomplicated. Yet it stayed in my mind for the rest of the day. Why? Because I recognized parts of myself in it. That is the magic of stories. Facts inform us. Stories transform us. Neuroscientists have discovered that stories activate multiple areas of the brain simultaneously. Instead of merely processing information, we begin experiencing ideas emotionally. We imagine situations. We connect with characters. We remember lessons more effectively. Without realizing it, I was learning through storytelling. And for the first time in years, learning felt enjoyable. One afternoon, I sat in a local cafe with a notebook in front of me. Around me, people talked, laughed, worked, and relaxed. I began writing simple English sentences about my own life. Today I felt hopeful. I enjoyed my morning walk. My family means everything to me. The sentences were easy. Almost childish. Yet they forced me to think clearly. Many language experts encourage learners to use simple language before complex language because clarity matters more than sophistication. The goal is communication, not perfection. That lesson applied to life as well. Perhaps happiness was not complicated. Perhaps I had simply been making it complicated. As the days passed, I noticed another change. I started listening differently. Not just to English. To people. When my children talked about school, I paid closer attention. When my husband shared stories about his day, I listened more carefully. When strangers spoke in coffee shops, parks, or stores, I observed how naturally conversations flowed. Real communication rarely sounded like a textbook. People paused. People laughed. People shared stories. People connected. The more I listened, the more I understood that language is ultimately about relationships. Words create bridges between people. And suddenly I became fascinated by those bridges. One morning, while sitting outside my favorite cafe, I overheard two older women having a conversation. They were discussing their lives, their families, and their experiences growing older. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing dramatic. Yet they spoke with warmth, humor, and honesty. I found myself smiling. Their conversation reminded me that human beings have always shared stories. Long before smartphones. Long before social media. Long before modern technology. Stories helped people learn, connect, and survive. Maybe that was why I felt so drawn to them. During this period, I also discovered something interesting about confidence. Most people assume confidence comes from success. But psychologists often describe confidence differently. Confidence grows from evidence. Small evidence. Repeated evidence. When you keep promises to yourself, confidence grows. When you complete small tasks consistently, confidence grows. When you survive difficult experiences, confidence grows. Losing my job had damaged my confidence. Yet my new routines were quietly rebuilding it. Morning walks. Reading. Writing. Learning. Listening. Simple habits. Small victories. Over time, they created momentum. One day, my daughter sat beside me while I was reading. "What are you studying?" she asked. I laughed. "I don't know if I'm studying." "Then what are you doing?" The question made me think. Finally, I smiled. "I'm learning." That answer surprised even me. Because it was true. I was learning how to be present. Learning how to listen. Learning how to appreciate life beyond work. Learning how to see opportunities instead of only problems. The education I was receiving had no grades. No certificates. No diplomas. Yet it felt incredibly valuable. As the weeks continued, my curiosity grew stronger. I started talking with people more often. Cashiers. Baristas. Neighbors. Parents at school events. Many of them shared small stories about their lives. And every story taught me something. One person taught me resilience. Another taught me patience. Another taught me gratitude. Piece by piece, my view of success began changing. Success no longer looked like a job title hanging on an office door. Success looked like meaningful relationships. Good health. Purpose. Peace of mind. And perhaps most importantly, the ability to keep learning no matter what life brings. One afternoon, while sitting at the same cafe where I often read, I noticed a woman sitting alone near the corner window. She appeared to be in her late 60s. She smiled warmly at everyone who entered. Several customers greeted her by name. Clearly, she was a familiar face. For reasons I could not explain, I felt curious. I had seen her before. Several times, actually. Yet we had never spoken. That day, however, something felt different. Our eyes met briefly. She smiled. I smiled back. A small moment. Nothing significant. Or so I thought. Because that simple exchange would soon lead to a friendship that would change the course of my journey in ways I never expected. And the lessons I had been learning through stories were about to become very real. The coffee shop friendship. Some of the biggest turning points in life do not arrive wearing a name tag that says important moment. They often look completely ordinary. A random conversation. A casual greeting. A stranger sitting at a nearby table. If someone had told me that one of the most valuable friendships of my life would begin inside a small California coffee shop during the most uncertain season of my career, I probably would have laughed. At that point, I was still trying to understand why losing my job had happened. I was still searching for direction. I was still rebuilding confidence one day at a time. Yet life had already started arranging pieces of a puzzle I could not yet see. The woman I had noticed several times before was about to become part of that puzzle, and what she taught me would change the way I viewed success, happiness, and the future itself. The next morning, I followed my usual routine. A walk through the neighborhood. A cup of coffee. A notebook. A few pages of reading. The cafe had started feeling familiar. The employees recognized regular customers. People greeted each other by name. It felt less like a business and more like a small community. As I entered, I noticed the same older woman sitting near the window. She was reading a book. A steaming cup of tea rested beside her. Just as before, she smiled warmly when our eyes met. This time, however, something unexpected happened. "Good morning," she said. Simple words. Nothing extraordinary. Yet those two words started everything. "Good morning," I replied. I ordered my coffee and found a nearby table. A few minutes later, she walked over. "Do you mind if I sit here?" she asked. Not at all. Within moments, we were talking. At first, the conversation was ordinary. Weather. The neighborhood. The coffee shop. The kinds of topics strangers often discuss. But then she asked a question that caught me off guard. "What brings you here so often these days?" For a second, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to give a short answer. Another part wanted to be honest. I chose honesty. "I recently lost my job." Her expression softened immediately. "I'm sorry," she said. Then she surprised me. She did not offer advice. She did not tell me everything would be fine. She did not try to solve my problems. Instead, she asked another question. "How are you handling it?" That question felt different. Most people ask what happened. She asked how I was doing. There is a big difference. For the next 20 minutes, we talked. Really talked. I shared some of my fears. The uncertainty. The frustration. The feeling of suddenly losing direction. She listened carefully. Not waiting for her turn to speak. Not interrupting. Simply listening. Psychologists often describe active listening as one of the most powerful forms of human connection. People naturally feel valued when they are heard. Yet true listening has become surprisingly rare in a world filled with distractions. This woman listened exceptionally well. Eventually, she smiled. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. Of course. I lost my job once too. That surprised me. She seemed calm. Confident. Comfortable. I had unconsciously assumed her life had always been stable. She laughed softly. "I know that look," she said. "What look?" "The look that says you think I have everything figured out." I laughed. Because she was right. Then she told me her story. Years earlier, she had worked for a company she loved. She had built her identity around her career. Then one day, unexpectedly, it ended. For months she felt lost. She questioned herself constantly. Sound familiar? Very familiar. The more she spoke, the more I recognized pieces of my own experience. Different circumstances. Same emotions. Fear. Doubt. Uncertainty. Hope. The universal language of change. Then she said something I never forgot. Sometimes life removes something because it is making room for something else. I had heard similar quotes before. But hearing those words from someone who had actually lived through the experience felt different. Authentic. Believable. Powerful. We continued talking for nearly an hour. Eventually, I asked about her life now. What happened after she lost her job? Her answer surprised me. She did not immediately describe another career. She did not talk about money. She did not mention promotions. Instead, she spoke about relationships. Friendships. family, volunteer work, travel, personal growth. The experiences that had brought meaning into her life. I eventually found another job, she said. But the funny thing is, it wasn't the most important thing I found. That sentence stayed with me. For years, I had viewed careers as the center of life. Now I was meeting people who viewed careers as only one part of a much larger picture. The perspective fascinated me. Over the next several weeks, our conversations became a regular part of my routine. Every few days, we met at the coffee shop. Sometimes we discussed books. Sometimes life. Sometimes family. Sometimes mistakes. The conversations felt natural. And every conversation seemed to teach me something. One day, I asked her the secret to staying so positive. She laughed immediately. Who told you I'm always positive? Again, she surprised me. She explained that positivity is often misunderstood. Many people believe positive people never struggle, never worry, never doubt. In reality, positivity often means continuing forward despite those feelings. That idea reminded me of resilience research I had been reading. Resilient people are not fearless. They simply refuse to let fear make every decision. That distinction changed how I viewed myself. Maybe courage was not the absence of uncertainty. Maybe courage was taking the next step anyway. The more we talked, the more I noticed something else. I looked forward to those conversations. Not because they solved my problems. Because they expanded my perspective. Human beings grow through connection. Study after study has shown that strong social relationships contribute significantly to emotional well-being, physical health, and life satisfaction. Yet many adults unintentionally become isolated. Work becomes busy. Schedules become crowded. Relationships become secondary. I had done exactly that. Losing my job had unexpectedly given me time to reconnect with people. And that connection was becoming one of the most valuable parts of my recovery. One afternoon, after a particularly meaningful conversation, the woman asked me an interesting question. What would you do if you weren't afraid? I smiled. That's a dangerous question. It usually is, she replied. We both laughed. But the question stayed with me long after I left the coffee shop. What would I do? Would I pursue something different? Would I explore opportunities one had previously ignored? Would I redefine success entirely? For the first time since losing my job, I began imagining possibilities instead of limitations. The future no longer looked like a giant problem waiting to be solved. It looked like a blank page waiting to be written. And unknown to both of us, that simple friendship was about to create an opportunity neither of us expected. An opportunity connected to community, purpose, and a surprising new direction that would soon appear from the last place I was looking. The conversation that changed everything was getting closer. And it would begin with a single introduction. Family nights changed everything. Have you ever been so busy building a life that you accidentally stopped living it? That question sounds strange until one day life forces you to slow down and pay attention. For years, I believed I was working hard for my family. I woke up early, stayed productive, met deadlines, and tried to create a secure future. Everything I did seemed responsible. Everything I did seemed necessary. Yet after losing my job, something unexpected happened. I suddenly had something I had not possessed in a very long time. Time. Real time. Not the kind squeezed between meetings and obligations. Not the kind measured by calendars and reminders. Genuine time. And as the weeks passed, I discovered that some of the most important moments of my life were waiting right inside my own home. The surprising part was that these moments had always been there. I had simply been moving too fast to notice them. One evening, shortly after my friendship with the woman from the coffee shop began, our family gathered around the dinner table as usual. At least it looked usual. In reality, something had changed. For years, dinner often felt rushed. Someone had homework. Someone had emails. Someone had a schedule to follow. Conversations happened, but often between distractions. Now things felt different. I had nowhere else to be. No urgent meetings. No professional deadlines. No constant pressure pulling my attention away. For the first time in years, I was fully present. At first, I did not think much about it. Then I started noticing things. My son had a very specific way of telling stories. He always included unnecessary details. The color of a backpack. The exact time something happened. The name of every person involved. It was hilarious. My daughter had developed a wonderfully sarcastic sense of humor. She could make the entire table laugh with a single sentence. My husband listened more than he spoke. But when he finally shared an observation, it was usually thoughtful and surprisingly funny. These details sound small. Because they are small. And that is exactly why they matter. Researchers studying happiness have repeatedly discovered that lasting well-being often comes from ordinary positive experiences rather than dramatic life events. Meaningful conversations. Shared meals. Genuine laughter. Human connection. The problem is not that these moments are rare. The problem is that many of us are distracted when they happen. I certainly had been. One evening after dinner, my daughter asked if we could play a board game together. Normally, I would have hesitated. Not because I disliked games. Because I usually felt busy. Even when I wasn't busy. You know that feeling? The strange modern habit of constantly feeling behind. Always catching up. Always preparing for the next task. Always thinking about tomorrow. That evening, however, I said yes. What followed was one of the funniest nights I could remember. We laughed. We teased each other. We made terrible decisions during the game. My son celebrated victories as if he had won an Olympic medal. My husband dramatically complained every time he lost. For nearly 2 hours, nobody checked emails. Nobody worried about schedules. Nobody talked about work. We simply enjoyed being together. Later that night, I found myself thinking about something important. Why had these moments become so rare? The answer was uncomfortable. Because I had allowed productivity to become more important than presence. Not intentionally. Gradually. Like many people. Modern culture often rewards busyness. Being busy sounds impressive. Being exhausted sometimes sounds successful. People proudly announce how packed their schedules are. Meanwhile, nobody brags about enjoying dinner with family. Yet which experience actually improves life? The answer seems obvious. And yet many of us forget it. During the following weeks, our family nights became a tradition. Some evenings we played games. Some evenings we watched movies. Some evenings we simply sat together and talked. The conversations became deeper over time. One night, my son asked a question I wasn't expecting. "Mom, are you still sad about losing your job?" Children have a remarkable ability to ask direct questions. Questions adults often avoid. I paused before answering. Then I smiled. A little. He nodded thoughtfully. Then he said something simple. "But you seem happier now." The room became quiet. Even my husband looked surprised. Because deep down, everyone knew there was some truth in those words. I was still dealing with uncertainty. I was still searching for opportunities. Yet something fundamental had changed. I smiled more. I laughed more. I worried less. Not because my circumstances had improved dramatically. Because my attention had shifted. Psychologists often describe attention as one of the most valuable resources we possess. Whatever receives attention grows larger in our experience. Focus on problems. Problems grow. Focus on gratitude. Gratitude grows. Focus on connection. Connection grows. I had spent years focusing primarily on professional achievement. Now I was focusing on relationships. The difference was significant. One evening after the children went to bed, my husband and I sat outside on the patio. The California air felt cool. The neighborhood was quiet. For several minutes, we simply listened to the sounds of the evening. Then he asked a question. "If you get another job tomorrow, what do you want your life to look like?" At first, I answered automatically. A stable income. Good benefits. Career growth. The usual things. Then I stopped. Because for the first time, those answers felt incomplete. Actually, I said slowly, "I want balance." The word surprised me. Balance. Not perfection. Not wealth. Not status. Balance. Enough work to feel purposeful. Enough time to enjoy family. Enough flexibility to appreciate life. Enough presence to notice what matters. My husband smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." The conversation continued late into the evening. For years, we had been partners managing responsibilities. Now it felt like we were rediscovering each other. Marriage researchers often emphasize that strong relationships depend less on grand romantic gestures and more on consistent everyday connection. Shared experiences. Meaningful conversations. Small moments of attention. Losing my job had unintentionally created space for those moments. The irony was impossible to ignore. One of the events I feared most had strengthened some of the most important parts of my life. That realization stayed with me. And it prepared me for something unexpected. Because only a few days later, during another conversation at the coffee shop, my new friend would introduce me to someone connected to an opportunity one never saw coming. An opportunity that combined purpose, community, learning, and work in a way I had never considered before. For the first time since losing my job, the future was beginning to look exciting rather than frightening. And the next chapter was closer than I realized. A new opportunity appears. Have you ever spent weeks staring at one door, desperately hoping it would open, only to discover that the opportunity meant for you was quietly waiting somewhere else? Life has a funny sense of timing. Sometimes nothing happens for days, weeks, or even months. Then suddenly, one conversation changes everything. Looking back, I can now see that every step of my journey after losing my job was preparing me for a moment I almost missed entirely. The morning walks. The family dinners. The friendship at the coffee shop. The uncomfortable questions. The slower pace of life. None of it seemed connected at first. Yet all of it was leading toward a single unexpected opportunity. The surprising part was that it did not arrive through a job website, a recruiter, or a corporate interview. It arrived through a conversation over tea. The woman from the coffee shop and I had become close friends. Not the kind of friendship built on years of shared history. The kind built on honest conversations. The kind where both people listen. The kind that makes time pass quickly. One afternoon, we sat near the window as usual. Sunlight filled the room. Customers came and went. The familiar sound of coffee machines hummed in the background. We talked about life. Family. Books. Dreams. Then she suddenly asked a question. Have you ever considered doing something completely different? I laughed. Different from what? Different from what you've always done. The question caught me off guard. Most of my attention had remained focused on finding another version of my old career. A new company. A similar position. A familiar path. I had never seriously considered anything else. She smiled. I thought so. Then she told me about a local community organization. The organization helped adults improve communication skills, build confidence, and connect with others through storytelling, conversation groups, and educational programs. At first, it sounded interesting, but not life-changing. Then she continued. They're looking for someone to help coordinate programs. I immediately shook my head. I don't think I'm qualified for that. The words came out automatically. Isn't that fascinating? Many people reject opportunities before they even examine them. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as self-limiting thinking. We create invisible barriers based on assumptions rather than evidence. My friend noticed it immediately. Why not? She asked. I've never done that kind of work. She smiled. Really? Really? What have you been doing these past few months? I looked confused. She continued. You've been listening to people. You've been learning. You've been writing. You've been encouraging your family. You've been growing. I sat quietly. Because she was right. Yet I had never viewed those experiences as valuable skills. I only counted professional accomplishments. Everything else seemed invisible. The conversation stayed with me for the rest of the day. That evening, I told my husband about it. His reaction surprised me. You should explore it. Seriously? Why not? I laughed. Because it's different. He smiled. Maybe that's exactly why. That answer sounded simple. Yet it echoed something I had been learning repeatedly. Growth often begins outside familiar territory. Researchers studying career development frequently emphasize that many meaningful opportunities emerge through relationships and unexpected experiences rather than traditional planning alone. In other words, life rarely follows a perfectly straight line. Mine certainly wasn't. The next week, I agreed to visit the organization. I told myself it was only for information. Nothing more. No expectations. No pressure. Just curiosity. The building itself was modest. Nothing fancy. No impressive corporate headquarters. No giant glass towers. No luxury offices. Yet the moment I entered, I noticed something different. People were smiling. Not forced smiles. Genuine smiles. Conversations filled the rooms. Groups of adults sat together sharing stories. Some practiced speaking. Some worked on confidence-building activities. Others simply connected with people around them. The atmosphere felt warm. Welcoming. Human. A woman from the organization greeted me and offered a tour. As we walked through the building, she explained their mission. Helping people communicate. Helping people connect. Helping people believe in themselves. The words sounded surprisingly familiar. Because many of those themes had become part of my own journey. Then something unexpected happened. We entered a classroom where a small group was practicing storytelling. One participant stood and shared a personal experience. Nothing dramatic. A simple story about overcoming self-doubt. Yet the room listened carefully. Respectfully. Supportively. When the story ended, everyone applauded. And suddenly I felt emotional. Not because the story was extraordinary. Because it was real. Authentic stories have power. They remind us that we are not alone. For months, storytelling had been helping me understand my own life. Now I was watching it help others. The realization hit me immediately. This mattered. A lot. After the tour ended, the director invited me into her office. We talked for nearly an hour. She asked about my background. My experiences. My interests. My goals. At one point, she asked a question that made me pause. What do you enjoy most? Not what are you qualified for? Not what pays the most. What do you enjoy? The answer surprised even me. I enjoy helping people feel hopeful. The words came out naturally. And the moment I said them, I knew they were true. Somewhere during the previous months, my priorities had shifted. Success no longer meant climbing higher. Success meant contributing something meaningful. The conversation ended positively. No promises. No immediate job offer. Just possibilities. As I walked back to my car, I felt something I had not experienced since losing my job. Excitement. Genuine excitement. For the first time, I wasn't simply searching for employment. I was exploring purpose. And those two things are not always the same. The drive home felt completely different from the silent drive that followed my job loss. Back then, fear had occupied every corner of my mind. Now curiosity was winning. Possibility was winning. Hope was winning. When I arrived home, my family immediately noticed the difference. You look happy, my daughter said. I laughed. I think I am. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I thought about everything that had happened. The lost job. The fear. The uncertainty. The conversations. The friendship. The lessons. Every piece suddenly seemed connected. And although I still didn't know exactly what would happen next, I knew one thing with certainty. A new opportunity had appeared. Not because I chased it. Because I had finally become open enough to see it. What I didn't realize was that an even bigger decision was waiting just ahead. A decision that would force me to choose between money and meaning, security and balance. The old version of success and an entirely new definition of what a good life could be. Choosing meaning over fear. Have you ever reached a moment where two paths stood in front of you, and neither one looked completely safe? One path feels familiar because it resembles the life you already know. The other feels uncertain because it asks you to become someone slightly different. Most people assume the hardest decisions involve choosing between something good and something bad. In reality, the most difficult choices often involve choosing between two good options. That was exactly where I found myself several weeks after discovering the community organization. For the first time since losing my job in California, I was no longer facing a future filled only with uncertainty. I was facing opportunity. The problem was that opportunity had arrived wearing two very different faces. And the decision I made would ultimately redefine my understanding of success, happiness, family, and purpose. A few days after visiting the organization, something unexpected happened. I received a phone call. Actually, I received two. The first call came from a company in my former industry. I had submitted an application weeks earlier and almost forgotten about it. The hiring manager wanted to schedule a final interview. The position offered a strong salary, excellent benefits, a familiar work environment. Everything looked stable. Everything looked logical. Then, only 2 days later, I received another call. This one came from the community organization. They wanted to discuss a possible role helping coordinate educational programs and community outreach activities. The compensation was lower. The title was less impressive. The career path was less predictable. Yet something about it felt meaningful. Suddenly, the future that had seemed completely empty now contained two possible directions. And I had no idea which one to choose. For several days, I thought about little else. Every morning during my walks, I replayed the possibilities. The corporate position represented security. The organization represented purpose. The corporate role felt familiar. The organization felt exciting. One offered predictability. The other offered growth. Neither option was wrong. That was what made the decision difficult. Psychologists studying decision-making have found that people often assume more options automatically create happiness. Surprisingly, the opposite can happen. When multiple attractive choices exist, uncertainty increases. The fear of making the wrong decision becomes stronger. That was exactly how I felt. Part of me wanted to return to the life I understood. Another part felt drawn toward something new. One evening, after dinner, I sat outside with my husband and shared everything. The advantages. The risks. The worries. The possibilities. He listened carefully. Then he asked a question that completely changed the conversation. Which option makes you feel more alive? I laughed. That's not a practical question. Maybe not, he said. But answer it anyway. The answer appeared immediately. I didn't need time to think. I didn't need a list. I didn't need analysis. The community organization. Without question. That realization surprised me. Because if someone had asked me that same question 6 months earlier, I probably would have chosen the corporate role instantly. Something had changed. Not the opportunities. Me. The previous version of myself measured success primarily through professional achievement. The version sitting on that patio now measured success differently. Connection, impact, balance, meaning. Those values had quietly become more important. Still, fear remained. Meaningful opportunities can be frightening because they require vulnerability. The corporate role came with a clear roadmap. The organization came with uncertainty. And uncertainty always asks for courage. The following week, I met with the director of the organization again. This time our conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. We discussed programs, goals, challenges, community needs, future plans. The more we talked, the more energized I felt. At one point, she said something that caught my attention. We help people find their voices. Such a simple sentence. Yet it resonated deeply. Over the previous months, I had been rediscovering my own voice. Not literally. Emotionally. I had stopped defining myself solely through work. I had started listening more carefully. Learning more intentionally. Living more consciously. Now I had an opportunity to help others do something similar. The idea felt meaningful in a way I struggled to explain. When the meeting ended, she asked whether I was interested in moving forward. I told her I needed a little more time. Not because I lacked enthusiasm. Because I wanted to make the decision carefully. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table after everyone else had gone to bed. The house was quiet. The same table where I had once cried after losing my job now became the place where I reflected on what I truly wanted. I thought about the woman from the coffee shop. The walks. The conversations. The lessons. The family nights. The laughter. The growth. Then I thought about the question that had guided so much of this journey. What would I do if I weren't afraid? The answer was obvious. I would choose the path that felt meaningful. Fear wanted certainty. Curiosity wanted growth. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt ready to listen to curiosity. Researchers often describe personal growth as the result of stepping slightly beyond comfort zones. Not recklessly. Not irresponsibly. Deliberately. Growth happens when people challenge old assumptions and explore new possibilities. Perhaps losing my job had been forcing me toward that lesson all along. The next morning, I made my decision. I called the corporate recruiter first. My hands were shaking slightly. Not because I was uncertain. Because I knew what I was about to do. I politely thanked them for the opportunity. Then I declined. When the call ended, I sat quietly. Part of me expected panic. Instead, I felt relief. A few hours later, I called the community organization. This time I smiled. I would love to move forward. The words felt surprisingly natural. The director sounded excited. So did I. For the rest of the day, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because every problem had disappeared. The salary difference still existed. The future remained uncertain. Challenges undoubtedly lay ahead. But the decision aligned with who I was becoming. And there is incredible peace in alignment. That evening, my family celebrated with pizza and laughter. Nothing extravagant. Nothing dramatic. Just gratitude. At one point, my daughter raised her glass of lemonade. To Mom's new adventure, she said. Everyone laughed. Then we clinked glasses. It was a simple moment. Yet it felt significant. Because deep down, I knew she was right. This was an adventure. Not merely a new job. A new chapter. A new perspective. A new version of success. And although I could not see the entire road ahead, I had finally stopped fearing it. What I didn't realize was that the most rewarding part of this journey was still waiting. Because once I began working with people whose lives were changing through connection, learning, and storytelling, I would discover something far more valuable than employment. I would discover purpose. And that discovery would transform everything. Discovering my real purpose. What if the thing you were searching for was never the thing you actually needed? For months after losing my job in California, I believed I was searching for employment. That seemed obvious. I needed stability. I needed income. I needed a plan. Yet as I settled into my new role at the community organization, I began realizing something surprising. My real search had never been about finding another job. It had been about finding purpose. The strange part is that purpose rarely announces itself when it arrives. It appears quietly. It hides inside ordinary conversations. It grows through meaningful relationships. It develops through service, contribution, and connection. Looking back now, I can clearly see that losing my old career created space for something far more valuable. At the time, however, I was simply trying to do my best one day at a time. And those ordinary days soon became some of the most meaningful days of my life. My first week at the organization felt exciting and intimidating at the same time. Everything was new. New people. New responsibilities. New routines. New challenges. For years, I had been confident in my professional environment because I understood it completely. Now I felt like a beginner again. Surprisingly, that feeling energized me. There is something refreshing about learning. Psychologists often explain that growth happens when people operate slightly beyond their comfort zones. Too much comfort can lead to stagnation. Too much stress can create overwhelm. But the right amount of challenge encourages development. That was exactly how I felt. Challenged. Curious. Engaged. One of my responsibilities involved helping organize conversation groups and storytelling sessions for adults from different backgrounds. Some participants wanted to improve communication skills. Some wanted more confidence. Some simply wanted connection. The diversity fascinated me. Every person carried a unique story. One afternoon, I met a man who had recently retired after working for 40 years. He confessed that he felt lost. Not because of money. Because of identity. Without his career, he no longer knew who he was. As he spoke, I immediately recognized the feeling. Just a few months earlier, I had experienced something similar. Another participant was a young mother struggling to rebuild confidence after years of focusing entirely on raising children. Another had moved across the country and felt isolated. Another wanted to pursue a dream she had postponed for decades. Different stories. Different circumstances. The same human desire. To feel seen. To feel valued. To feel connected. The more people I met, the more I realized something important. Everyone is carrying a story. Some stories are visible. Most are not. That realization changed how I viewed strangers. The person standing in line at a grocery store. The cashier at a coffee shop. The neighbor walking a dog. Each person was living through challenges, hopes, fears, and dreams I knew nothing about. And suddenly, the world felt more compassionate. More human. One morning, during a group discussion, I asked participants a simple question. What is something life taught you that school never did? The responses were incredible. One person said resilience. Another said patience. Someone else said forgiveness. A retired teacher said gratitude. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. Nobody wanted to leave. As I listened, I noticed something unusual. I was learning as much as everyone else. Maybe more. The role I accepted was supposed to involve helping others. Yet every day they were helping me. One participant in particular left a lasting impression. Her name was Maria. She attended regularly and rarely missed a session. During one meeting, she shared a story about immigrating to the United States many years earlier. She spoke about fear, uncertainty, language barriers, loneliness. Then she described how small acts of kindness from strangers helped her build a new life. When she finished, the room was silent. Not uncomfortable silence. Respectful silence. The kind that follows honesty. Then people applauded. Some even wiped away tears. At that moment, I understood something powerful. Stories create connection faster than facts. A list of achievements may impress people. A genuine story helps people relate. That lesson became one of the foundations of my work. As the weeks passed, I looked forward to each day. Not because every day was easy. Because every day felt meaningful. Meaning, according to many researchers studying well-being, is one of the strongest predictors of long-term life satisfaction. People can tolerate stress, setbacks, and challenges when those experiences serve a purpose they care about. For years, I had chased achievement. Now I was experiencing meaning. The difference was remarkable. One evening, after a particularly rewarding day, I returned home feeling energized. My husband noticed immediately. "You love this work, don't you?" I smiled. "I really do." He laughed. "I haven't seen you this excited about work in years." His observation surprised me. Then I realized he was right. I used to feel proud of accomplishments. Now I felt grateful for impact. Those emotions are similar, but not identical. Achievement asks, what did I accomplish? Purpose asks, who did I help? The second question changed everything. Months earlier, losing my job felt like a disaster. Now it looked completely different. It looked like a turning point. Not because unemployment was enjoyable. It wasn't. Not because uncertainty was easy. It wasn't. But because those challenges forced me to examine my life honestly. They forced me to slow down. They forced me to listen. They forced me to grow. Without that disruption, I might have continued racing through life without ever questioning where I was headed. One afternoon, while organizing materials for an upcoming event, I found myself remembering the day I received the email. The shock. The fear. The sadness. The confusion. For a moment, it felt like a completely different lifetime. Then I smiled. Because if someone had shown me my current life back then, I would never have believed it. I thought I was losing everything. In reality, I was being redirected. And the most surprising part was still ahead. Because the changes happening inside me were beginning to influence my family in ways I had not yet fully noticed. The lessons I was learning about purpose, balance, and connection were quietly transforming our home as well. And soon, I would discover that the greatest reward of this entire journey had nothing to do with careers, salaries, or professional success. It had everything to do with the people waiting for me around my own dinner table. The greatest reward was home. What if the happiest ending to your story was already sitting at your dinner table long before you started looking for it? Human beings are fascinating. We often search far away for answers that are hiding close to home. We imagine that fulfillment lives inside a promotion, a larger paycheck, a bigger house, or some future achievement waiting beyond the horizon. Yet sometimes life removes enough noise for us to finally notice what has been there all along. That realization became impossible to ignore as my new role at the community organization settled into a comfortable rhythm. I enjoyed the work. I loved the people. I felt purposeful again. But the most important transformation was not happening at the office. It was happening inside my own family. And strangely enough, I almost missed it. Several months had passed since the day I lost my job. By then, life looked completely different. Not perfect. Not problem-free. Just different. The panic that once filled my mornings had disappeared. The uncertainty that once dominated my thoughts had softened. In its place stood something more stable. Perspective. One evening, I arrived home after a particularly rewarding day at the organization. The house was unusually lively. Music played from the kitchen. My daughter was laughing about something. My son was telling an animated story that somehow involved a science project, a soccer ball, and a broken backpack. My husband stood near the stove trying unsuccessfully to follow a recipe. The entire scene felt wonderfully chaotic. And suddenly I noticed something. I wasn't thinking about work. Not at all. Years earlier, I would have entered the house carrying unfinished projects in my mind. Emails. Deadlines. Meetings. Problems. Even when physically present, part of my attention often remained somewhere else. Now I was fully there. That realization felt surprisingly emotional. Psychologists frequently describe attention as one of the purest forms of love. When we give someone our full attention, we communicate value, respect, and connection. Unfortunately, modern life constantly competes for that attention. Phones vibrate. Notifications appear. Schedules demand action. Many people spend time together without truly being together. I had done exactly that for years. Without intending to. Without even noticing. Losing my job had interrupted that pattern. And the results were becoming impossible to ignore. At dinner that night, my daughter shared exciting news about a school project. Normally, I would have listened while mentally organizing tomorrow's schedule. This time, I listened carefully. Asked questions. Stayed engaged. Her excitement became my excitement. Her story became important because she was important. Simple. Obvious. Powerful. Later that evening, my husband and I sat together after the children went to bed. The house finally quieted. The familiar California night air drifted through an open window. We talked about our day. Then he smiled. You know what I've noticed? What? You laugh more now. The comment surprised me. Not because it felt inaccurate. Because it felt true. I did laugh more. I smiled more. I worried less. The change had happened gradually enough that I barely noticed it. Yet everyone around me had. Research consistently shows that positive emotional states influence entire households. Emotions spread through families much like energy spreads through a room. Stress affects everyone. Calm affects everyone. Optimism affects everyone. Perhaps my own transformation had quietly influenced the people I loved. The thought felt humbling. A few weeks later, something happened that made this lesson even clearer. My son needed help preparing a presentation for school. In the past, I probably would have squeezed the task into a busy evening. This time, we spent hours working on it together. We researched. We practiced. We laughed at mistakes. We improved each version little by little. By the end, the presentation looked great. But the presentation wasn't the real reward. The time together was. Several days later, after delivering it successfully, my son surprised me with a comment. Thanks for helping me. Of course. No, really. Thanks. Then he added something I will never forget. It was fun. Fun. Such a small word. Yet it carried enormous meaning. Because children often remember how experiences feel far longer than they remember specific details. And suddenly I realized something important. My family did not need a perfect mother. They did not need a constantly productive mother. They did not need a professionally impressive mother. They needed a present mother. That realization changed everything. The months continued passing. Season after season. Our family routines evolved. Weekend walks became common. Game nights continued. Conversations became deeper. Laughter became louder. Not because life had become easier. Because we had become more intentional. One afternoon, while organizing old files in my home office, I found documents from my previous career. Performance reviews. Project reports. Awards. Certificates. Achievements that once felt incredibly important. I sat there for a long time looking through them. And then something unexpected happened. I felt grateful. Not nostalgic. Grateful. That career had taught me valuable lessons. It helped support my family. It shaped part of my journey. But it was no longer the center of my identity. I finally understood the difference. Work was something I did. It was not who I was. That distinction brought freedom. Many people spend years trying to separate self-worth from professional achievement. Sometimes life teaches the lesson gently. Sometimes it teaches the lesson through disruption. In my case, it chose disruption. And strangely enough, I was thankful for it. One evening near the end of the year, our family gathered outside to watch the sunset. The sky glowed with shades of orange, pink, and gold. The same California sky I had looked at months earlier while feeling completely lost. Yet everything felt different now. Not because the sky had changed. Because I had changed. As we sat together, my daughter leaned against my shoulder. My son pointed toward the horizon. My husband wrapped an arm around me. Nobody spoke for a moment. There was no need. The silence felt full. Comfortable. Meaningful. And in that quiet moment, a realization settled deeply into my heart. The greatest reward of this entire journey was never the new job. It was never the career change. It was never the opportunity itself. The greatest reward was the life I rediscovered while searching for direction. The family I appreciated more deeply. The relationships I strengthened. The perspective I gained. The person I became. And although I did not know it yet, one final conversation was waiting just ahead. A conversation that would bring this entire journey full circle and reveal the unexpected truth hidden behind the title of my story. Because losing my job had felt like an ending. But in reality, it had been the beginning of something better all along. I found something better. What if the worst email you ever received becomes the reason you build the life you were actually meant to live? If someone had asked me that question on the morning I lost my job, I would have thought it sounded ridiculous. Back then, I was sitting on the edge of my bed staring at a screen, convinced that an important chapter of my life had just ended. Fear filled my thoughts. Uncertainty followed me everywhere. The future looked like a giant blank space. Yet now, standing on the other side of that experience, I can finally answer the question hidden inside the title of this story. How did I lose my job in California but find something better? The answer is simple. I stopped chasing the life I thought I was supposed to have and started paying attention to the life that was already waiting for me. About a year after losing my job, I found myself sitting in the same coffee shop where so much of this journey had unfolded. The same window. The same comfortable atmosphere. The same familiar sounds. Even the woman who had become my friend was there. We met regularly by then. Not because I needed guidance anymore. Because genuine friendships are worth keeping. As we talked, she smiled and asked a question. Do you remember the first time we spoke here? I laughed immediately. Of course. You looked terrified. She wasn't wrong. I remembered every detail. The uncertainty. The self-doubt. The fear of the unknown. The belief that my future had somehow been damaged. Then she asked another question. If you could talk to that version of yourself today, what would you say? I paused. The answer came slowly. Because it mattered. I would tell her not to panic. My friend smiled. I continued. I would tell her that losing a job doesn't mean losing her value. I would tell her that uncertainty doesn't last forever. I would tell her that fear isn't always a warning sign. Sometimes it's an invitation. My friend nodded. Then she said something that perfectly captured the entire journey. Sometimes life has to interrupt us before it can redirect us. Those words stayed with me long after the conversation ended. Because they felt true. Very true. Many people spend years following paths they never intentionally chose. They simply keep moving. One promotion leads to another. One responsibility leads to another. One routine leads to another. Eventually they wake up and realize they haven't asked themselves an important question in a very long time. Am I living the life I actually want? That question changed everything for me. The interesting part is that the answer wasn't dramatic. I didn't move across the country. I didn't become famous. I didn't suddenly achieve extraordinary success. Instead, I built something far more valuable. Balance. Meaning. Connection. Presence. Researchers who study long-term happiness consistently find that meaningful relationships, a sense of purpose, gratitude, and community contribute more to well-being than status or material achievement alone. Those findings are not particularly glamorous. They are simply true. And over the previous year, I had experienced them firsthand. The work I now did mattered. Not because of a title. Because it helped people. My marriage felt stronger. Not because we avoided challenges. Because we faced them together. My relationship with my children felt deeper. Not because I became a perfect parent. Because I became more present. The changes seemed small when viewed individually. Together, they transformed my life. Several weeks after that conversation at the coffee shop, our organization hosted a community event. Dozens of people attended. Stories were shared. Friendships were formed. Laughter filled the room. At one point, participants were invited to talk about experiences that had changed their lives. To my surprise, someone encouraged me to share my own story. I hesitated. Then I agreed. Standing in front of the audience, I described the morning I lost my job. The fear. The uncertainty. The confusion. People listened quietly. Many nodded. Some smiled knowingly. Because nearly everyone has experienced some version of unexpected change. A lost opportunity. A failed plan. A difficult transition. A season of uncertainty. Then I shared what happened afterward. The walks. The family dinners. The friendship. The new opportunity. The lessons. The growth. When I finished, the room remained silent for a moment. Then applause filled the space. Not because my story was extraordinary. Because it was relatable. Human. Real. Afterward, several people approached me. One woman said she was currently facing a major career transition. Another man said he had recently experienced a setback that made him question his future. A younger participant admitted she felt lost and overwhelmed. Each conversation reminded me of something important. We never know who needs to hear our story. We never know who might find hope inside our experiences. And sometimes the very thing we wish had never happened becomes the thing that allows us to help someone else. That realization felt like the final piece of the puzzle. The final lesson. The final answer. Later that evening, I returned home. My family was waiting. The people who had supported me from the very beginning. We sat together on the patio watching another California sunset. The sky glowed with the same colors it had displayed on the morning I lost my job. Orange. Pink. Gold. Yet everything felt different. Because I was different. I looked at my husband. At my children. At the life surrounding me. And suddenly I understood the title of this story more clearly than ever before. I lost my job. That part was true. But I found something better. I found purpose. I found balance. I found gratitude. I found deeper relationships. I found confidence that wasn't attached to a job title. Most importantly, I found a version of myself that I had been too busy to notice. So if you are listening to this story while facing uncertainty, disappointment, or change, remember this. A closed door is not always the end of the journey. Sometimes it is simply the moment life quietly points you toward a better path. The future may not look the way you expected. But that does not mean it cannot become beautiful. In fact, some of the most meaningful chapters begin exactly where the old story seems to end. And that is how I lost my job in California but found something better. Not immediately. Not easily. But one small step, one conversation, and one lesson at a time. Before you leave, I want to ask you one simple question. What if the thing you are struggling with today is not the end of your story? What if the disappointment, rejection, failure, heartbreak, or uncertainty you are carrying right now is actually preparing you for something you cannot see yet? A year before this story ended, I believed I had lost one of the most important parts of my life. I thought a closed door meant a broken future. I thought success had disappeared. I was wrong. Sometimes life removes what is comfortable so you can discover what is meaningful. Sometimes the path that scares you the most becomes the path that changes you the most. And sometimes the chapter you desperately want to erase becomes the chapter that inspires someone else to keep going. So wherever you are today, don't judge your entire future by your current situation. Keep learning. Keep growing. Keep listening. Keep believing that your story is still being written. Because one conversation can change a life. One decision can change a future. And one unexpected moment can reveal a completely different version of happiness. Now I have a question for you. If you suddenly lost the job, routine, or plan you depend on today, what would you discover about yourself? Think about that for a moment. Then share your answer in the comments below. I read your comments, and your story may inspire someone who needs hope right now. And if this slow English story helped you practice listening, reading, speaking, vocabulary, pronunciation, or simply gave you encouragement during a difficult time, please take 1 second to support the channel. Like this video, subscribe for more slow English stories, turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload, share this video with a friend who needs motivation today. Here on this channel, we don't just learn English. We learn confidence. We learn resilience. We learn real-life lessons through powerful stories. And the next story might completely change the way you see your own life. So don't miss it. Because the next chapter is coming sooner than you think. Until next time, keep practicing English, keep moving forward, and remember, your story is not over. The best chapter may still be waiting for you. See you in the next slow English listening practice story.